I do believe that at some point we will have an example of a one-person billion-dollar valued company. Look at the company behind Cursor. They have 20 employees, $100 million in ARR. And they're certainly a unicorn.
When I take a contract and I ask GPT to review it, and then I go ask one of our expensive lawyers to review it, I'm not seeing as much of a difference between those outputs.
Nobody thought they needed an iPhone until Steve Jobs and the folks at Apple created the iPhone, and then everybody realized, wow, I need the iPhone. Very often, your competition isn't some other big company out there. It's just people are DIYing it, right? The reason why people aren't interested is because you just haven't built out that next feature. No, Dave. The reason why people aren't interested is because they don't have the problem or they don't see the need.
Welcome back to Learnings at Scale. I'm Max Thilén. This is part 2 of my conversation with Dave Sifry, founder of Technorati and WarmStart. He's a tech entrepreneur, product thinker, and someone who has spent decades scaling innovative products impacting millions at companies like Lyft, Reddit, and Interana. In this episode, we continue our exploration of the billion-dollar one-person company thought experiment. We dive deep into how AI-native teams are fundamentally reshaping what it means to build and scale a business, and why traditional metrics like headcount might already be obsolete. Dave also shares essential insights on customer discovery, how entrepreneurs can ship dramatically faster using AI, and the exact skills entrepreneurs should master today. So let's dive in. I get the sense that there's probably some sort of death valley of companies that were too far along before AI came along, where it's going to be hard for them to actually integrate it. Because everyone will talk about the AI transformation, but then when you actually get into the nitty gritty of it, what it requires is a huge amount of training. And even if you have really smart people, you tell them how to use AI, they're not necessarily using it the right way. I think that right now, the people that are actually leveraging AI in some way that is a true force multiplier are the predominantly early adopters who have spent a lot of time sparring with it over the last year or 2 years, who really know, I'll use this model for this, I'll use that model for that. This is how I load the context. This is how I write the prompt. I see this in our little company where I'm constantly pulling team members over as I'm working on something so they can watch how I go about it. If you're starting a company today and you're able to find 2 or 3 or 4 of these kinds of people who have that approach in their different disciplines, someone that's going to do marketing and someone that's going to do sales and someone that's going to do engineering, and you are from day 0 building the company in that way, you are going to build a fundamentally different company from what you would have built. The hiring decisions will look entirely different, right? Things that used to take a huge amount of time that would lead to these management and mid-management layers, such as just scope. What do mid-managers do all day? I think a lot of people actually don't know. What does a manager or a director level person do? Well, they spend a lot of time talking to employees and telling them how to do stuff and writing out SOPs. Someone that knows how to use AI well can just click a button with Super Whisper and walk around their office for 5 minutes, brain dumping what they want, and then they got to spend a little time refining it. I'm doing this all day long. For example, using AI to delegate to people who I wouldn't have otherwise been able to delegate to. It is very good at bridging these gaps where I have no engineering background. I have an engineer helping me with an MVP of something. And he asked me, what should the user roles be inside an app? I don't know. I've never done this before. Well, you tell me, what should the user roles be? And then I just did exactly what I said. Hit the button, start chatting with it. Look, we need to have this app. It's for client-facing delivery. I need to be able to have my team log in and do back-end stuff. I need to be able to have client admins who can see all the client stuff. Then there need to be other people who can only see their thing or whatever. The first pass of this thing was, to me, pretty passable. I was like, drop this in a doc and you delete the hyphens and the little lines that make it obvious that it's AI and get rid of the emojis and whatever. And I send it to the dev and I'm like, is this what you need? Exactly what I'm looking for. Fantastic. And it took me 3 minutes. Point I'm just getting at is talking about these breakpoints in the company growth. Is that even what a company is? Is it even going to be? Is there going to be kind of any resemblance to that? Because you start to see, oh my God, if I had 20 people in a room working this way, the amount of work that could get done would be insane. And then to your point, there's probably some equilibrium there in optimal team size. What do you think that looks like, building a warm start in a company in this space, looking forward a couple of years?
Yeah. So first off, there's a really interesting observation that early on in my career, and I think for many people, the idea that it's a measure of status, the number of people who work for you. And you manage or you lead a team that has over 100 people in it, and you realize, oh my God, this is like the worst curse that I could have ever asked for.
Yeah, it's such a farce. Like, if that's the status symbol, I'm just going to go spin up a bunch of fake LinkedIn profiles or hire a bunch of employees to do something.
And it's not because people are bad or incompetent. First of all, the level of things that you're asked to weigh in on, because if you've done your job well, starts to become more and more around things like HR and legal and the really tough, complicated things that people were able to actually solve it in the organization. And if you've done your job well, they'll solve it in the organization, right? So you start getting these really complicated, thorny problems that look very different from the reason why I started a business in the first place. One of the things I have been thinking, and it's more of a thought experiment at this point, I do believe that at some point we will have an example of a one-person billion-dollar valued company. And there's some pretty good ideas around this. Like, you could say, if Sam Altman created another company, he could create a billion-dollar company.
So what
you
are
have
the
to
ground
start out-
rules?
You
What are
have
the
to start
ground
out
rules?
with some
Valuation or
basic
revenue?
ground rules. You can say it's a billion-dollar valuation, but you need to have certain metrics in place. Some reasonable ones, at least in the tech world, is, you could say, well, that's if for high tech, for a fast growing company, a company that's actually doubling at least once every year, you can imagine that a 20x valuation over your ARR is probably somewhere between 10 to 20x is reasonable, right? So if you said, okay, let's be conservative then and say, what would a 50 to $100 million ARR company look like? Because, you certainly see those companies being valued as unicorns today, right? There's a number of those kinds of companies that aren't just some smart person with an idea who just happened to get a really high valuation. These are grounded in growth and facts. So then you ask yourself, well, even the best companies today, the Netflixes, the Googles, the Metas, tend to be around $2 million of revenue per employee. You do the math. And that includes the cafeteria workers, the janitors, the software engineers, and the executives, everybody all combined. And I think that, so thinking about this in terms of, well, how would you be able to get to a $50 million or a $100 million revenue per employee kind of business? And are you going to be able to do that with just one employee? It sets the mind going. Will there probably come a time? I think there will come a time. What about the 10-person company? I think we're actually, if not already there, really close. Look at the company behind Cursor. They have 20 employees, $100 million in ARR, and they're certainly a unicorn. So I think this is not a fantasy. This idea of building companies that are still in little red schoolhouse mode. Wouldn't it be even cooler if we could get it down to 2-pizza team? And again, those were, one could argue that because of the impending scale, maybe they're outliers, but it's not an unreasonable way to look at it.
I'm curious.
Right? WhatsApp also, right? They had zero revenue and got sold for $1 billion. Some of those companies, I might argue, are looking like outliers in terms of a general business proposition, but it's fair, right? They did get bought. They did have a valuation.
Right. I mean, the one-person billion-dollar company will be an outlier, I would imagine, as well, right?
Yeah,
We're talking about
no doubt. And I like to think of it more as a thought experiment than an actual, I'm never going to hire a person, no consultants, because I've got to.
Yeah, I mean, look, in practice at this point, even if you're directionally on a track that could be this, you are going to have lawyers and accountants, and there is going to be some external marketing person who's helping you with something, or a freelancer here or a freelancer there. So I mean, if we're talking about the ground rules of one person billion-dollar company, in your mind, thought experiment, is it none of that? I'm GPT lawyering everything. GPT is my accountant. I've built an agent for handling customer support queries. Is that the limit? Or if someone came to you and said, Dave, I started a one-person billion-dollar company, and then you said, show me your Slack, and in their Slack there is a VA and some freelancers, would you still consider it a one-person billion-dollar company, or does it truly need to be the byproduct of one person to get the plaque?
Exactly. And to me, look, are they building something of significant value where the actual revenue per employee is significantly higher than the most efficient companies today? That's what I'm really interested in. The one person, the one employee billion-dollar company is a thought experiment. So let's not get too fixated on it. But for example, what are the business processes that every single company needs to have that right now certain companies are hiring people for?
Well, that's what I was curious to ask you about.
Can I outsource those things? Yeah. So every company needs something to sell. Like they need some kind of a product or service that usually needs to be developed in some way, right? They need to have some kind of a sales function, right? They have to have some way of being able to bring money in the door. They need to have some kind of operational capability where the thing that they are selling, they are actually able to deliver consistently. They need to have some kind of a customer support or customer service function that needs to interact with the people who are paying them money and be able to keep them satisfied. And they need to have some kind of way that people actually find out about them, whether it's marketing, advertising, or PR. There's a go-to-market piece. And I think those are the 5 key pieces. Then you'll add in all the supplementary stuff, like you need to have some way of recognizing and understanding your finance function. You need to have some way of making sure that you're not creating liability for yourself unnecessarily. So there's some kind of a legal function. Like those I would call far more ancillary and supportive, because most companies don't have a general counsel on staff as an employee during the initial phases. Most people don't have a CFO or a controller on staff. We already outsource a lot of those kinds of
And
functions.
those are more, I think at this point, just from my casual GPT ordering, because obviously we have contracts going out all the time, and the odd accounting question, I get the sense that those are much closer to being a solved problem with AI than something like go-to-market or product.
Lawyers and accountants might argue with you on that.
Sure,
But
to the extent that an entrepreneur running a business needs a lawyer. What do we need? We need to make sure that we're signing a contract, that there's nothing crazy in there. We need to write a contract for a customer. Again, I'm not minimizing this, nor am I saying that people should be shipping out GPT contracts. But when I take a contract and I ask GPT to review it, and then I ask one of our expensive lawyers to review it, I'm not seeing as much of a difference between those outputs. If I say, give me a marketing strategy, and I ask GPT versus someone on our team, you know?
So here's the discriminant function, the thing I use in my own head. Is this function creating competitive advantage for me and my company or not? If it is not creating competitive advantage, then outsource it. Whether that's done by a human, a group of humans, a bunch of AIs, humans plus AI, it's just a matter of cost. And how much is this thing cost and how much efficiency am I going to be getting out of it? And what I'm looking instead is, what are the core business functions that are really necessary to create that competitive advantage? That's why I go back to those 5 core pieces.
From your perspective, as someone who has certainly been inside of many companies worth more than $1 billion and growing fast and building cool things, if there is some entrepreneur listening to this, the gears are turning and they're like, okay, I want to do this, try and get in there, maybe through the lens of these functions that you're talking about, but what is the curriculum that they need to build for themselves? What are the things that you need to go and figure out before day one of going to start this? Because obviously there is something like learning by doing, but I'm curious how you would, if someone asked you, okay, what are the 4 or 5 things that I need to go and start figuring out before I embark on this to increase my odds of success? What would you say?
So first off, I think that there are a few different ways that this could potentially happen. One of them could very well be media personality, right? You can nowadays build a game that could, in theory, get $100 million in revenue. The real question would be, is that going to be a sustainable revenue stream for a long period of time? These kinds of questions come up. I'm trying to build what would a sustainable company look like. So maybe I'm adding that constraint somewhat. And I think it could be in the B2B or in the B2C space. I don't think that you're constrained only to one particular type of business, but I do think that asking oneself, what are the different processes that are needed in order to be able to build and achieve this function, right? Now, look, I'm a product guy, right? At my heart, I'm one of those people. They always ask how you know what somebody's core mode is. You give them a crisis and say, go figure it out. A core finance guy is going to open a spreadsheet and try to figure out the numbers. A sales guy is going to try to sell something, right? I am a product guy. So I'm going to sit down and think, what's the customer problem? Who's the customer? What's the issue? What could we build that could have a defensive moat that would solve the problem? How do we build that? That's how my brain naturally thinks. I don't want to constrain people to only thinking about this from a product-oriented way, but I tend to think about things that way. The first thing and the most important thing is, what is the problem you are solving or the deep need that you are satisfying? If I can't articulate that clearly, the best companies, by the way, can articulate it on a cocktail napkin. Okay. Google, organize the world's information. What an amazing way to describe the value proposition, right? Or Uber or Lyft, get you from A to B anytime, anywhere. Fabulous. So can you really understand and articulate what the deep problem is that people have, or some kind of a deep user need? User needs are amazing, but often really hard to figure out. Nobody thought they needed an iPhone until Steve Jobs and the folks at Apple created the iPhone. And then everybody realized, wow, I need the iPhone, right? So that understanding is a whole other set of issues and problems, but those are the two key things.
How do you train that muscle, though? I think that I see this a lot on Twitter. People are trying to find the problem to solve. And I think that in and of itself is a very profound skill set, to be able to look at some industry or some space and say, this is the problem worth solving. How do you get there?
You start out by acknowledging that whatever your first idea is probably wrong. But have an idea. So this is a really interesting place where I think the schizophrenia of entrepreneurship shows its head really powerfully. So to be able to say, I've got this idea, and by the way, I think that I can build something that's better, smarter, faster, more competitive than anybody else in the world, or in my town, or in my whatever, right? But like that, I can do this. It's the worst piece of crap I could ever imagine. Like, oh my God, we've got to improve it. And are we really solving this important problem? Who are we really solving it for? Constantly be in that place of confidence and deep insecurity. Those are two really important things to keep in balance at all times. Otherwise, I could think, I've got the answer and spend 6 months building it only to hear crickets because nobody understands or nobody gets it. Or I could spend all this time talking to people and listening and not synthesizing that into something that is competitive and defensible and actually build something over time that, becomes even more competitive over time. So I have a rubric, and I think that the rubric starts with, is this an important problem or deep need for someone? Sometimes that's me. Right? And that's okay. It's okay if I am the customer of one to start with, as long as I'm the only one to start with.
There are other Daves in the world.
Well, I got my own little weird quirks too, right? And boy, have I built things for audiences of Dave that got incredibly poor receptions.
Right.
So I know that I can trust myself to get that initial idea and articulate it and think about, oh, what would I build and what would that look like and how would that solve the problem? How does solving that problem actually become competitive with everything else that's out there? What are people doing today to solve that problem? Very often, your competition isn't some other big company out there. It's just people are DIYing it, right? Or they don't see it as a very important problem. So recognizing that A, it's a problem, and then B is like, is it painful enough that people will pay for it? Wow. And guess what? That means I actually have to talk to other people. I need to listen to other people. There are some amazing tools you can use, social media listening tools, where you will hear people who say, oh my God, I wish this existed. If this existed, I would pay for it. Or like, oh, I have this huge problem. And you realize there is a deep need that people are expressing for, I don't know, refrigerated dog food. You name it. There are all of these different kinds of deep needs that certain groups of people have. So go out and interview those people and talk to them and understand what is really going on. Why do they have this problem? What is their deep need that needs to be satisfied? Will this idea actually solve that need for them? How much are they willing to pay? And so there's some good pricing questions that you can use as a part of this also to understand, like, what's the most that you would pay for this and feel like, wow, that's expensive, but like, I'll still pay for it. And then you're like, what's the least amount that I would pay for this and feel like, oh my God, this is such a bargain. It can't possibly be true. Or what is so much money that I would be like, yeah, no, I have this problem, but I'm not interested in solving that, right? And so you can start to talk to these people and start to gauge an idea of approximately how much are people willing to pay.
It sounds like your first step, and tell me if I'm misunderstanding this, but it sounds like your starting point for someone that wants to figure this out is to get really good at scrappy customer research. Is that right? Like getting
my
out
God.
there, talking to people, figuring it out. What is this worth to you? That kind of thing.
If I could go back to the Dave of 30 years ago and give him one incredibly important lesson, it would be stop building things for yourself right away.
Right.
It's okay to have the idea. And now with AI, you can even prototype it and come up with something really quick. But stop assuming that you know what the answer is. And the reason why people aren't interested is because you just haven't built out that next feature. No, Dave. The reason why people aren't interested is because they don't have the problem or they don't see the need.
In this world of AI, though, where if you wanted to build an MVP, that might have meant 3 months or 6 months in your garage building an MVP. Well, now in that same amount of time, you might be able to ship 30 MVPs. How would you reconcile that now versus going out and talking to customers and really sharpening the spear before you go and do it versus just doing stuff?
Yeah, I think it's a combo. So be careful about building MVPs. They also can lead you to a false sense of satisfaction. There's a couple of really good books. There's Lean UX Principles written by Laura Klein. There are a bunch of these books that helped me, that taught me how to go in and actually do open-ended user research where I'm not coming to people with, look at this and tell me what you think about it.
Right.
And instead,
you're
I'm
more
actually
strategic
asking
about it.
them, help me understand what are your problems. And if they're not even mentioning the ballpark that I'm in, I'm either talking to the wrong ICP, the wrong ideal customer profile, or maybe they just don't have this problem. By stopping the idea that I've got a leading question and I want to get around to the part where we talk about this cool new thing that I built, and I start to really make sure that I understand what's the problem that you're having, and is this an important problem to you? I'll give you an example. With Warm Start, I started talking to agency owners. I built it for myself because I wanted to let people know about this cool thing that I built. I realized I know people. I've been working in this business for 30 years. And who do I talk to after that first 10 or 15 people that I just banged out emails to? And I realized, oh my God, you've got all of these people you have talked to over the years. What if you used AI to research all of the people you've already talked to and find a way to get back in touch with them? Bang. This is amazing. And I got incredible results just for me. But then I started talking to other people and I started asking them, tell me a little bit about your problems. Like, what happens when you have a client and now that client's been working with you for a long time? How do you get your next client? And they go, oh God, sometimes it's just feast. Everything is great. We've got so much coming in. I have to turn it away. And then other times a big client shuts off and I realize, oh my God, I've got a team of 30 people and how are we going to make money? And I haven't been doing all of that early research and follow up. It's feast and famine. And I start hearing about this 6, 8, 10, like all of these different folks who run these kinds of service businesses. And I realized, oh, that's a really deep need. And every single one of them said to me, oh my God, I know that I should be sending out emails and staying in contact and networking with people on a day-to-day basis. And they're like, but I'm just so busy, I don't get to do it. Boom. You hear those kinds of things and you say, aha, now I understand the hook that my particular product can actually latch into a deep need and an important area where I can show value. And then that's the place where I don't need an MVP. I could show you mock-ups. I could have you do a little writing exercise. I could say, hey, of these 6 or 7 different ideas, could you rank order them for me? Which one of these is most important? And I haven't spent a minute with an AI and I haven't built a line of code. But if I start hearing the same things over and over again, if I talk to about 15, 16 people, if I hear it from 6 or 7, you're onto something. The customer base defines my product strategy. The customer base now tells me what my product roadmap is going to be because they're saying, oh yeah, this is great. But Dave, it would be even better, right? And now I start collecting all of that information. I'll give you a great example. I love these AI note-taker apps. And I'm glad that more people are used to having their meetings recorded and having these note-taker apps in our conversations. I take those transcripts and analyze them afterwards. The ability to take those transcripts, put 6 or 10 of them into a Claude, a Gemini, or into an OpenAI model that actually has a pretty big context window and say, help pull out key areas of pain that you're hearing from these people. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
This is maybe our follow-on episode because I want something I want to build for myself that I feel someone would probably buy as well. I remember years ago reading Ray Dalio's book, and he's talking about Bridgewater and Associates and how they have this radical transparency thing where they record every meeting. This was before AI note takers, and it was well before COVID, right? So it was much more awkward. They had video cameras and recorders in all their meeting rooms, which at the time sounded very strange. But now as we've gone to this Zoom world, it's almost overnight just become, like you said, no one even thinks about it. And something I've been thinking about trying to solve our own problem is like, we now have, and we're in a consulting business, right? So there's extra value in this stuff. Our transcripts are our work product in many ways. We could now just take 5 years of these transcripts and load it all into a vector database, do some cleanup and do some extraction, have a pretty powerful sort of second brain there of advice that a lot of people have paid a lot of money for. And I think that over time, this type of proprietary context is going to become incredibly valuable. And the companies that have been diligent about capturing it are going to be the winners. And then extend that into what's happened in Slack and your SOPs and documentation, all of these things that are the reflection of your specific knowledge.
Let's go back to the beginning of our conversation where we talked about return to office and how this is harder for some of the folks who are just starting out in their career because maybe they're not getting that great mentorship or the serendipitous opportunities. What happens when you've got an AI mentor like GPT?
You might be afraid of asking your boss something that is elementary, but obviously you don't have that same problem with an AI. That wraps part 2 with Dave Sifry. If you've ever wondered what building and scaling a company will look like 5 years from now, and how you can prepare today, I hope this episode offered a glimpse into that future. In our final part, we'll shift from ideas into tactical execution. Dave shares practical workflows, automation tools, and real-world examples to help you operate smarter, leaner, and faster. Plus, we'll take a closer look at what Dave himself is building next at WarmStart. Smash that subscribe button, hit like, and I'll see you in part 3.